Okay, good evening. Before we begin tonight's proceedings, I'd like to start with an opening prayer. Before I do that, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the CHON Kwäch'än Council and the Kwanlin First Nations. I'll say the prayer in my language, which is Southern Shoshone. Konishchish data yata nanje. Thank you, Father. Agan zanu sothan daka nata je. Keep us safe this day. Sothan datsa nata nanje. Think about us in a good way. Dadu daka nata. Keep watch over us all. Klahu je. Amen. Thank you. Now it is my pleasure and honor for the opening remarks. I'd like to welcome the Grand Chief of the Council of Yukon First Nations, Chief Mathieya Alatini, to provide the opening remarks on behalf of the Council of Yukon First Nations.
Thanks, Rose. Welcome, Dunje, Ainji Mathieya. Very pleased to welcome all of you to this, and those of you online. I know we have quite a few leaders who are tuning in either on Facebook Live or on CHON FM, and I do want to give a big shout out to CHON FM for streaming tonight's proceedings. And I want to remind our candidates to give a shout out to all of our communities. And I want to give a shout out to Gúnta Technology, Gunta Business, who's doing the technology and streaming on the Facebook Live for us tonight. They're making sure that you guys all look great. They're, yeah. Thank you. I think this is an important election for us, and all elections are important. Our political representatives bring our voice forward. They get to allocate the money that looks at the programs and other initiatives that we need for our everyday life, whether that's maintaining our roads or looking at our health infrastructure. As First Nation governments in the territory, it is extremely important that we look at our relationship with the territorial government and with the federal government. We know that the agreements that we've signed are tripartite agreements, and we are looking to our candidates to discuss and share with us their vision for the relationship with the First Nation governments moving forward. So with that, I really thank you guys for being here and for taking the time. I know there's a lot. This is a very short time frame for this election, very short writ period. Just get her done. And we really appreciate you guys being here tonight and sharing your views. So, Sheesh, thank you.
Nana Thatsia Uye. My name is Rose Kushniruk. Good evening to everybody here in the room, online, and to all of you in the room, and people who are joining us on Zoom out there in virtual land. I want to say a special welcome to our elders and very importantly to the youth that are taking the time to be a part of this forum. I'm a member of the Yukon First Nations and I'm from the Crow clan, and it's an honor to be here today for this forum on the traditional territory of the Kwanlin First Nation and CHON Kwäch'än Council. So what I will be doing is I'll be going over the rules of order and the agenda for the evening. But before I do that, Grand Chief mentioned it a bit, but I want to talk about the purpose a bit about the forum. So tonight's forum is an opportunity for us to hear directly from the territorial candidates on key issues that matter to Yukon First Nations. So forums are for everyone, for the candidates and for you. It's a chance to hear what each party stands for and what they say they will do. It's a chance for you to hear your questions also get answered. I'll now read over your rules, the rules of order for this evening. So my role as the moderator I'll be fair and impartial and not express personal opinions. I'll moderate the discussion and ensure all candidates and participants observe time limits. Candidates will be given a 30-second warning, which we have right here, right in front of you. You'll see a little flashcard pop up, and a bell will sound when your time is reached. I'll also manage the speaking order. I'll be drawing names to determine who responds first to each questions and ensure everybody has equal time. During the audience question and answer, I will read out loud written questions collected during the break. Candidates, each candidate will have 3 minutes for an opening statement in alphabetical order and 3 minutes for a closing statement, and that'll be drawn by myself. Each candidate has 3 minutes to respond to the 5 core submitted questions by CYFN and its leadership. Each candidate has 2 minutes to respond to audience questions. Audience participation. During the 10-minute break, audience members may write questions on slips of paper that you can find back there. You can submit your questions to Jessie Hudson, Stephanie Joe, and Katie Gregg. Questions will be reviewed for clarity, duplication, and fairness before reading them out loud. Questions are addressed to all candidates, not individuals. And the speaking order, opening, alphabetical, closing, drawn by myself. Candidate response, I'll be drawn out of the hat for how we respond. Rules of conduct, respect the timing, order and manner in which the moderator conducts the forum. Respect is a guiding principle of life. It is taught by our elders. Please be respectful to all participants, candidates, and community members. Turn cell phones off to silence during the forum. Again, for those of you just joining us virtually, we want to welcome party representatives here with us tonight at the Gold Rush Inn in Whitehorse. We have Currie Dixon, Yukon Party leader and candidate for Copperbelt North. We have Kate White, Yukon New Democratic Party leader and candidate for Takini. And we also have our Premier Mike Pemberton, of the Yukon Liberal Party leader. We will now go into the opening statements from the party representatives in alphabetical order. And you have 3 minutes. So first up is Yukon Party candidate and leader, Currie Dixon.
Okay, thank you very much, Rose. Thank you as well for the opening prayer, and to Grand Chief Mathieya Alatini for the welcome tonight from CYFN. And thank you for acknowledging that we're welcomed here on the traditional territories of the Kwanlin First Nation and the Kwäch'än Council. We're excited about this opportunity to talk about important issues with regards to Yukon First Nations. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Currie Dixon, and I'm the leader of the Yukon Party. I was born and raised here in Whitehorse and have lived here my entire life. And whether it was during my time at university where I studied First Nations governance, land claims, and the constitutional and political development of the Yukon while obtaining my master's degree, or my time in politics, both on the government and the opposition side, I've always been interested in how Yukon has become such a leader in land claims, self-government, and reconciliation in Canada. As many of you know, I was minister in the Yukon government from 2011 to 2016, and since 2021, I've served as the leader of the official opposition. Over the course of my time in each of those roles, I've had the opportunity to learn a lot about how the Yukon government and Yukon First Nations governments can work together. I've seen what works and what doesn't work. I've seen a lot of success, and I've seen a lot of things that can be improved. So as we move forward with this election and the possibility of forming the next government, I'm thankful that I have the opportunity this evening to share some of my vision for how a government led by me would engage with Yukon First Nations at the government-to-government level, and how the Yukon government can participate and support work with all Yukon First Nations governments through multilateral bodies like the Yukon Forum. I also want to note that as committed as I am to this work, I think it's worth noting that it's not just about me and my commitment. It's about the commitment of my team and the entire public service if we are lucky enough to form government. I know that it's the same with Yukon First Nations governments as well. It's not just about the chief, it's about councillors and those who work in the governments themselves, and about the entire nation and its citizens. And that's why I'm so proud of the team that we in the Yukon Party have put together in this election. We have leaders from across the territory with diverse backgrounds and experiences. And we have a strong group of First Nations candidates that have all joined our team. Our slate of candidates includes 6 First Nations candidates who are each members of 6 different Yukon First Nations: Gunta Kwäch'än, Tronda Kwäch'än, Little Salmon Carmacks, Karkos Tagish, Kwäch'än, and Kaska. Not only do we have more First Nations candidates than any other party in this election, we have the most First Nations candidates of any party in the history of the Yukon. I'm very proud of that and of the team that we've built. And I'm looking forward to sharing with you tonight some of my vision and how I and that team will offer the Yukon a change. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the discourse tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Yukon Party Leader Currie Dixon. We'll now move to Yukon New Democratic Party, Kate White, for your opening remarks.
Thank you very much for having me. My name is Kate White, and I'm the leader of the Yukon NDP, and I'm running to be Premier. This election is about making healthcare better for Yukoners. It's about lowering costs for people, and it's about making sure that this is a place where every Yukoner can afford to build a good life. And that's what I've always been focused on. When I ran in my first election in 2006, I learned that the job of a politician was to support people when they needed it most, to listen to people's stories so that others don't have to live them. Since then, I've heard so many stories on doorsteps and kitchen tables and in communities across the Yukon. Stories from healthcare workers who've been disrespected by Liberal and Conservative Yukon Party governments to the point where they're so burnt out they're ready to walk away. I've heard stories from families who've been stuck on the family doctor waitlist for years, or who've had to wait for hours at the ER just to fill a prescription, or from those who haven't been able to depend on their health center being open when they need it. And I've heard stories from hardworking Yukoners everywhere who are forced to choose which bills to pay today and which to push off until the next time they're paid. And in this election, on top of worsening healthcare, on top of life getting more expensive, people are still reeling from the worst mining disaster in Yukon's history. A company profited, and then again left Yukoners on the hook for cleanup costs, this time for hundreds of millions of dollars. And to date, we still don't know the full extent of the damage to the land or the water, and we might not know for years to come. And as the Kwäch'än Done First Nation has pointed out many, many times now, it did not have to be this way. This is a failure of oversight that has had profound and lasting consequences for our territory. And every day I hear from Yukoners who are fed up that mining companies get away with whatever they want and they leave us to pay the price. So I ask you this: how can you trust the Conservatives and the Liberals who continue to take money from these companies? No wonder people are fed up. And again, I really believe that it doesn't have to be this way. So that's my pledge to you in this room and across the territory. I want to be different from what we've had before. I want to be an honest partner. I believe that we can work together to bring mining legislation into the 21st century. We can work in genuine partnership on land use plans that respect the final agreements, UNDRIP, and our land and water. And we can work together and learn from the Yukon First Nations Education Directorate and provide school nutrition to every single child in every single school in our territory. We can work together to provide better healthcare for all Yukoners, no matter where they live. We can work together to better support our neighbors and loved ones who are suffering with substance dependence or mental health challenges. And in case it needs to be said, no one will need to take me to court to get me to respect Yukon First Nations. So I appreciate the time you've taken to be here tonight. I look forward to your questions and the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Yukon New Democratic Party Leader Kate White. We'll now move to Premier Mike Pemberton of the Yukon Liberal Party Leader for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Rose, and thank you, Grand Chief, for your welcoming. Good evening. I'm grateful to be here on the traditional territories of the Kwanlin Dun First Nation and the Kwäch'än Council. I want to acknowledge everyone across the Yukon who is joining us today from their traditional territories. Before I state anything else, I want to speak directly to what I said at the Council of Yukon First Nations General Assembly earlier this year and the harm that it caused. I was eager to attend the General Assembly before being sworn in as Premier. I want to clearly and sincerely say, I'm sorry. What I said at that moment was wrong. It didn't reflect my values. It didn't reflect the respect I hold for Yukon First Nations, and it didn't reflect the kind of relationships I believe in. I know that words carry weight, especially when they come from someone with a title such as mine, and I take full responsibility. Since then, I've been called in and I've been called out, and I've listened. I've reflected deeply. I've sat with those reflections to better understand how I fell short and to ask myself what it truly means to move forward with greater care and integrity. Because reconciliation isn't something we ever complete. It's a constant force that requires vision, intention, and self-awareness. And it demands that people like me and that government structures like ours take responsibility. It means arriving with humility and staying when it's uncomfortable. It means letting go of ego. It means asking whose voice is missing and then making space for that voice to be heard, loud and clear. And it means remembering every day that this is First Nations land and that partnership is not optional. It's the baseline. I believe deeply in the future of this territory. I believe we have the opportunity to build something that's grounded in justice, equity, and deep respect. A Yukon where First Nations laws, languages, and governments are not only recognized, but embedded in how decisions are made. I believe we can and must approach housing, our #1 priority, through the same lens, not just as a construction issue, but as an issue of sovereignty, dignity. Thank you.
So there you have it. Thank you for your opening remarks. Now let's dive into some questions. We have 5 core questions that have come from CYFN leadership and Yukon First Nations chiefs. So I did draw for the first. The first to respond will be Premier Mike Pemberton from the Liberal Party leader, followed by Currie Dixon, Yukon Party leader, and Kate White of the Yukon New Democratic Party leader. So your first question. Question number 1 is on the theme of reconciliation and governance. As a party to the final agreements, how will your government advance reconciliation, including full implementation of obligations, co-governance, and meaningful partnerships with Yukon First Nations? How will your government support the Yukon forums and intergovernmental forums?
Thank you, Rose. Since 2016, our Yukon Liberal government has worked to rebuild and strengthen the Yukon government's relationship with Yukon First Nations governments. Through the Yukon Forum, we've sat down together regularly and to identify shared priorities and move them forward. And we know that real progress happens when we take the time to listen, to show up, and to build trust. During my time as Premier, I made it a priority to visit nearly every community in the territory and meet with nearly each chief and council. Those conversations, sitting together in community halls, kitchens, offices, helped guide our government's approach. We've also stood shoulder to shoulder with Yukon First Nations leadership during Yukon Days in Ottawa, bringing our united voices to the federal government on northern issues that matter to all of us. We've been at the table co-drafting legislation, the Child and Family Services Act, the Health Authority Act, and I just want to point out that we have candidates in the other parties going to the door knocking, and saying they will not honor the work that's been done on the Health Authority Act. We will continue on this journey and honor the work that we've done with the Health Authority Act.
Thank you for your response. I'll now move to Currie Dixon, Yukon Party leader and candidate.
Thank you very much, Rose, and thank you very much for the question. Following the 2016 election, there was a significant reset in the relationship between Yukon government and Yukon First Nations governments. I know that prior to 2016, those relationships were strained. Since then, we've seen a reinvigorated Yukon Forum and a number of bilateral and multilateral intergovernmental forums. The previous Liberal government elected in 2016 certainly deserves credit and recognition for the work that they did to bolster and support those relationships. Since the 2021 election, during my time as leader of the official opposition, I've had the chance to watch from the outside 3 different premiers and 3 different styles and ways of engaging with Yukon First Nations. And I think each of them have had their strengths and weaknesses, and I can say with certainty that I've learned from each of them. I've also learned a lot from talking to First Nations leaders about those strengths and weaknesses and where these forums, institutions, and relationships can be built on or improved. I've met with the Yukon First Nations School Board, for instance, and see the good work that has been accomplished as First Nations increasingly lead initiatives that have historically been tightly managed by the government, be that in early childhood education, child and family services, housing, or economic development. And that's why I've committed to carrying on that good work and continuing with the good work that's been underway. I'm committed to participating in 4 Yukon Forum meetings each year to maintain those relationships and discuss and implement shared priorities. And further, we'll engage with Yukon First Nations leaders to ensure that the agendas reflect those priorities, and we will jointly develop a multi-year strategic plan to help keep our work focused and moving forward. I know that committing to boards and committees in the Yukon Forum and a strategic plan seems like the bare minimum to commit to, and in some ways it is. But after 30 years since the UFA, there is still much work to do in realizing the intent of governance frameworks, and we're committed to real actions to move the ball down the field and support the commitments that we've all made together. Thank you.
Now I'll move to Kate White from the Yukon New Democratic Party for your response.
Thank you. So it suggests that the only way to advance reconciliation is to truly believe in it. It's long past time that governments stop fighting with First Nations. I'm committed to truly listening, to learning, to working together, to building respectful relationships and defining solutions together. There's so much innovation from First Nation governments, whether it's the First Nation development corporations tackling the housing crisis, energy projects like Chuniquan's wind turbines, or CYFN leading initiatives to reduce stigma around substance use. Everywhere we look, we see First Nations leading. So Yukon government needs to lean into these innovative solutions and work together. A good example of this is the meal program created by YFNED through Jordan's Principle. That's what inspired me to announce that the Yukon NDP will bring a universal school nutrition program that will ensure that in every community and every school, kids can thrive. Yet despite all of these successes that we've been seeing, we continue to see how territorial government programs are not keeping up despite so many opportunities, whether in education, healthcare, housing, or land use planning. We know one member's fight against First Nations in the Peel is what happens when reconciliation isn't taken seriously. Industry understands that for a project to be successful, they need First Nations support. And most people understand that trying to evade governmental responsibility is not only wrong, but a huge waste of money and effort. The Yukon NDP will live up to the commitment made decades ago to land use planning. Our team will take action on all 21 truth and reconciliation calls to action that have been ignored by the Liberals, and we'll work with Indigenous women's organizations and First Nation governments to act on all recommendations of the MMIWG2S+ report. We'll work with First Nations development corporations to build housing that meets the needs of their communities. We'll work with Yukon First Nation governments to implement UNDRIP and align all territorial legislation with the Declaration. Committing to Yukon forums is the absolute bare minimum. It's literally the law. But my commitment is that I'll show up beyond what is legally required, and I'll show up when you need me and when you ask me to come.
Thank you for your responses to question number 1. So we're going to move on right into question number 2. And the order is from the Yukon New Democratic Party leader, Kate White. She will start first, followed by Yukon Party leader, Currie Dixon, followed by the Premier Mike Pemberton. So the question is around land, water, and resource development. The devolution transfer agreement was signed 24 years ago, and there is still a lot of work that needs to be done in creating successor legislation to meet the obligations under the DTA. In upholding the devolution transfer agreement, the current government and Yukon First Nations have been working on designing new mineral legislation. So if elected, how will your government honor these discussions and continue to develop new legislation? Are there any other areas of the DTA you would like to address as well?
Thank you. So the Yukon NDP will absolutely continue to work to develop new mineral legislation. To be a Yukoner is to love this land, and we cannot be truly well if the land is not. Decades of mismanagement from both the Yukon Party and the Liberal governments have caused so much harm to the land, most recently from the Eagle Mine disaster. The only way forward for the mining industry in this territory is for us to bring mining legislation into the 21st century. The Eagle Mine disaster is a brutal reminder that the status quo is not an option. First Nation support is not a nice-to-have thing. It's an absolute requirement if we as a territory are to succeed. And you know what? Industry knows that. Most everyone knows that. But both the Yukon Party Conservatives and the Liberals have been in power since the DTA, and successor mining legislation was never a priority. In the 14 years since I was first elected, First Nations have always been clear that new mineral legislation is a priority. So in 2021, the Yukon NDP used the little influence that we had with just 3 MLAs to get it moving. You can count on the fact that if you elect me as Premier, my government will get it done, and we'll do it in true partnership. I've had many conversations with First Nations leadership about their concerns around the framework, and then to have that framework leaked ahead of an election was unacceptable. I've heard from leaders that final agreement should be the floor and not the ceiling when developing new mineral legislation. And I commit to only moving forward in a way that has the full support of First Nation governments. The Yukon needs to change the way we approach land use and resource development. And my commitment is to implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And to ensure that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past, we will conduct a public inquiry into Eagle Mine, Minto Mine, and Wolverine, so that mining failures like this do not happen again. And though it is long overdue, after failures by both the Liberal and the Conservative Yukon Party governments, we can commit to completing land use planning by working with and not against Yukon First Nations. Thank you.
Now move to Currie Dixon, Yukon Party Leader.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate the question as well. I want to begin by recognizing how much effort has gone into reviewing, designing, and working towards the new mineral legislation between the current Yukon government and First Nations governments. We are very much in favor of continuing that work and delivering new mineral legislation for placer and for quartz mining as the next government in partnership with Yukon First Nations, Canada, and industry. As members of the opposition, we've not been privy to the details of what has been discussed and achieved so far, but we know that there's much more work that lies ahead. We did receive this summer a much appreciated briefing from the CYFN, and thank you for taking the time to engage us on this important conversation about the legislative framework. But we've not yet seen the actual documents themselves and any of the detailed policy proposals. But we also know from public comments that not all First Nations agree with what's been achieved so far, and we know that industry has also expressed concerns as well. I think it's incumbent on all governments to recognize that in order to make meaningful progress on something as large and complex as mining legislation, we need to put serious focus on it, and we are committed to doing that. As well, we know that there are many other issues that need work to implement the vision of the devolution transfer agreement. We need to be honest with ourselves and with each other about the capacity of our respective governments to tackle some of these issues. Making priorities and devoting the resources, attention, and effort to acting on them requires difficult decision-making. I will commit to working with First Nations leadership to identify priorities for implementation of the devolution transfer agreement and act on them. But I also know that it will take time and a lot of work from both the Yukon First Nations governments and the Yukon government to get that done. Thank you.
Thank you, Currie, for your response. I'll now move to Premier Mike Pemberton from the Liberal Party.
Thank you for the question. I want to start by saying a huge thank you to everyone involved for constantly making this work a priority over the years. Your dedication, even when resources are stretched, is noticed and deeply appreciated. The work to renew Yukon's minerals legislation has been a government-to-government effort that began in 2021, involving the Yukon government, Yukon First Nations, transboundary Indigenous governments, and the Council of Yukon First Nations. This is challenging work, and we've heard a wide range of perspectives. Some feel the framework doesn't go far enough or that it doesn't fully address certain priorities. Others, like the Yukon Chamber of Mines, feels it goes too far. We can promise that we'll keep showing up at the table, listening, and working together to find solutions that reflect the needs and values of all Yukoners. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that the framework was released in error by the public service via ATIP. We are truly sorry for that. We know this caused frustration, and we take responsibility. We are committed to restoring trust and continuing to work thoroughly and respectfully. It's worth noting that we've heard that some of Yukon Party candidates have suggested at the doors that a reset of the process was needed. While that's one approach, we believe the progress we've made so far, the partnerships and the conversations and the shared work is valuable, and we would be best kept to building on that foundation. I think the Blue Jays won. Minerals legislation, as well as the review of the Lands Act, this work must continue. We will continue to advance land use planning both through the development of new plans, including the Dawson Regional Land Use Plan, which is well underway, and the implementation of existing plans. We signed a renewed joint education action plan in the partnership with Chiefs and Committee on Education, outlining priorities over the next 10 years to improve education for Indigenous leaders, and advance reconciliation and education for all learners. This development of the First Nations School Board provides for shared authority over 10 schools in the Yukon. The Yukon led the way in implementing change in the story to upholding dignity, justice, Yukon's MMIWG 2S+ strategy. The work isn't easy, and it isn't over, but we'll keep showing up shoulder to shoulder to get it done. As part of this, our team would like to explore the creation of a standalone department dedicated to First Nation relations, separate from the Executive Council Office.
Thank you for your response. Yay, Blue Jays, hey? We'll now move on to question number 3. And we will start with Premier Mike Pemberton, go to Currie Dixon, Yukon Party Leader, and Kate White, Yukon New Democratic Party Leader. So question number 3 is about the economy. With the significant interest in Canada's north, example, Arctic security, Canadian sovereignty in the north, critical minerals, and the passing of Bill C-5, nation-building projects, there is expected to be major impacts on the Yukon's economy. If you form the government, what are your plans related to the economy? And how will your government fulfill the duty to consult and ensure Yukon First Nations are engaged? So we'll start with Premier Pemberton.
Thank you. We've heard loud and clear from the federal government about increased defense and security spending and how a significant portion of this funding is expected in the north. All of these changes will have big impacts, and we want to make sure that they benefit Yukoners and Yukon First Nations alike. Engagement is key. I would like to congratulate Kwäch'än Adamak on her appointment to the Federal Indigenous Advisory Council. We'll need strong voices at the table as we as a territory navigate increased prioritization of projects of national importance. Our understanding is that Bill C5 doesn't apply to the Yukon since we have YESA, but we need to monitor this closely. As a party, our goal is to support responsible growth that respects the land and the communities that have cared for it for generations. Mining remains an important part of our economy. Our critical mineral deposits are world-class, and our global demand will continue to grow. But it's not just about the resources. It's about doing mining differently, responsibly, safely, and in partnership with Yukon First Nations and local communities. Continuing our work to draft new mineral legislation is critical to ensuring our legislation is working for everyone's interest in mind. We applaud Selkirk First Nation for making history as the first First Nation to assume ownership and operational control of a mining operation. This is a major milestone in Indigenous economic self-determination, and it sets national precedent for Indigenous-led reclamation and development in Canada's mining sector. I'd also like to take a moment to touch on the First Nations procurement policy. It's still relatively new. We strongly believe in its intent, supporting economic reconciliation and creating real opportunities for Yukon First Nations businesses. At the same time, we know there are challenges. We know the policy isn't perfect, and we need to review it regularly to reflect the evolution of economic reconciliation over time. We also recognize that the Yukon Party has publicly said that they will get rid of the policy. Invest in community infrastructure and while waiting for the completion of community, this is the wrong page. I'm sorry, I'll finish there.
Thank you for your response. I'll now move to Currie Dixon, Yukon Party leader.
Well, thank you very much for the question. It's an important one. The Yukon is currently facing some considerable economic headwinds with high debt and a sluggish economy. But despite that, the Yukon First Nations are well positioned to be leaders in the development of our economy. Whether it's through direct ownership in mining operations like we've begun to see with the Selkirk First Nation and the Minto mine, energy development, both renewable and non-renewable in communities around the Yukon, or land development like we're seeing here in Whitehorse with the Kwanlin First Nation, First Nations are taking a much more active and stronger role in leading economic development in this territory. With an increased focus from the federal government in developing critical minerals, investing in northern community infrastructure, or making large military investments in the north, there seems to be even more opportunity ahead. However, we recognize that in all these cases, it will require First Nations voices at the table and an important leadership role for First Nations governments. Yukon has a long history of outside governments making decisions about our infrastructure that did not engage locals, incorporate traditional knowledge, or reflect priorities of the individuals living here. Every Yukon community has an infrastructure gap, and there's an opportunity through tapping into the federal agenda or the agenda of the current federal government to find ways to secure funding for major investments. Our government will commit to working with Yukon First Nations and communities to identify priorities and to collectively advocate with Ottawa for investments that support community well-being, but also northern security, climate change, and First Nations economic development objectives. On a smaller scale, the Yukon has a long history of supporting smaller community-driven economic development opportunities, from trades training and the development of the Centre for Northern Innovation of Mining to the development of Carcos Commons and the Single Track to Success. And we want to see new areas where we can help advocate for support from Canada for those types of community priorities. We want to build on that work, and we know that in order to do that, we need to work in partnership with Yukon First Nations governments.
Thank you, Currie. I'll now move to Kate White.
Thank you. So don't let anyone ever tell you that you have to choose between caring for people and a strong economy, because not only can they go in hand, but they absolutely have to. People are struggling right now to make ends meet, and it doesn't have to be this way. Today in Yukon, 10% of the entire Yukon government budget, hundreds of millions of dollars, has gone to clean up the Eagle mine disaster. And the Yukoners are paying for this. And both the Yukon Party and the Liberals' inaction on modernizing our mining regime is to blame for this. You can't say you're a champion of the economy when you let something like this happen. And even after the disaster, the Yukon Party was in the Legislative Assembly defending Victoria Gold. This money should have gone to building housing, to hiring nurses and EAs for our schools, to creating good jobs for Yukoners. But when your party is funded by big corporations, your priorities are different. That's why I'm proud that I've never taken a dime from Victoria Gold, and no one on our team has or will ever take corporate donations for this very reason. Every day I hear from Yukoners that they're fed up with big companies doing whatever they want and leaving us to pay the price. And the same goes for past government's checklist approach to working with First Nations. So let me just say that if you feel that some political parties have learned nothing from fighting First Nations in the courts, well, I think you might be right. And there is no way forward on major projects without Yukon government and First Nations truly working together. It is the right thing to do, and it avoids shameful and wasteful fights in courts. We can and we must do better. We can build an economy where companies that receive large government contracts are required to hire local tradespeople and apprentices. We have 6 certified tradespeople on our team, and that experience will help us deliver a stronger economic approach all across the territory. We can give our youth and communities the tools they need to succeed. We will make sure companies that get large government contracts have to commit to providing jobs to Yukoners and apprenticeship opportunities through community benefit agreements. We've seen real economic drivers brought forward by First Nation governments and development corporations. Energy projects like White River First Nations Diesel Offset Project, one of the largest in the country, led by one of our candidates, John Vandermeer, who's running in Kwäch'än. First Nation development corporations have led the way on solving the housing crisis, like Datagai's housing projects in Whistlebend, that not only provide opportunity for First Nation citizens, but for all Yukoners. And so as Premier, I will be an enthusiastic partner in these economic drivers in the future for our Yukon.
Thank you for your response. To question number 3, candidates, we'll now move to question number 4, which is around the theme of climate change and adaptation. Yukon First Nations Youth Fellows have developed the Reconnection Vision, and this was accepted and endorsed by Yukon First Nations leadership. The Reconnection Vision is a path forward to guide climate action. There is also the Yukon government's Our Clean Future plan. With the Yukon warming at twice the global rate, how will your party support communities, especially rural and Indigenous ones, in implementing the Reconnection Vision and Our Clean Future to respond to the rapid climate change we are experiencing? Examples are permafrost thawing, greener energy alternatives, change in environments are a few. We'll now start with, sorry, I forgot to give you a heads up. So Currie Dixon, Yukon Party leader, starts first, followed by Mike Pemberton, Yukon Liberal Party, and third, Kate White, NDP.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Congratulations. I want to begin by offering my congratulations to the youth leaders who put together the Reconnecting Vision. It's a powerful document. I encourage folks to read it. I'd also like to thank the elder advisors and knowledge keepers who worked with them to develop that document. It's a powerful one. And I know in speaking to those folks, I want to say it may seem like government with its deeply entrenched bureaucracy is light years from the reconnection pathway envisioned in that document. But there are several recommendations within that I think align with my priorities and others that we envision will be part of longer-term government-to-government collaboration. For example, first, we see a place for diverse housing approaches, support for local trades development, and manufacturing of local materials. Second, I know Yukon First Nations are essential partners in all energy development projects. Third, we're committed to modernizing mining legislation, as we spoke about earlier, and see ways that the government can better support resource demand. Finally, we believe strongly in local agriculture initiatives and applaud the work done by Yukon First Nations to improve food security in their communities. And we've got commitments in our platform in regards to healthcare, including mental health supports to our communities, which is something that's highlighted in that document. In regards to the broader issue of climate change, we recognize that the North is experiencing climate change more directly and acutely than any part of the country. We need to take meaningful action in response to this. 5 years ago, we were supportive of the work done on the Our Clean Futures report. But now, in 2025, we think that there needs to be a fresh look at some of what has been done and what remains undone. I'm of the view that over the past years, we've spent too much time debating about unrealistic targets and timelines and not enough time taking real action. We'd like to see an updated climate change action plan that focuses on realistic actions that can be taken here in the Yukon to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. An important part of that needs to focus on climate change adaptation. We need to ensure that our communities have the infrastructure and resiliency to respond to the changing climate. Whether that is increased number and severity of floods or fires, we need to put community resiliency at the center of our efforts. This kind of work has to be done in partnership with First Nations governments around the territory. Thank you.
Thank you for your response. We'll now move on to Premier Mike Pemberton of the Yukon Liberal Party.
Thanks for the question, and thanks for the reconnection vision, which is rooted in community, culture, and being connected to the land. When we developed Our Clean Future, we did it working with all communities and all nations, and a big shout out to Chief Frost for that work. I will highlight 3 ways in which we will work to support our communities as we address climate change. Through the development of local energy, every one of our off-grid communities, we have First Nation-led renewable energy projects, solar in Old Crow, Beaver Creek and Watson Lake, and wind in Kwäch'än. We also have renewable projects in the works with on our island grid, wind battery backup with Kwanlin done, and pumped hydro storage with Kwäch'än Council. Several other nations have told us about renewable projects that they are interested in. Local resilience is also about things like reducing our exposure of communities to flooding and wildland fire. An example of this is the work that First Casca are doing to harvest locally and to build wood homes with Heartland Homes, the work our First Nations Heartland Homes and the work our First Nation wildland fire crews are doing to keep us in other parts of Canada safe. Heartland Homes and the work our First Nation wildland fire crews are doing to keep us in other parts of Canada safe during wildfire season. We are working with municipalities and First Nation governments to finalize the community wildfire protection plans and completing flood hazard maps. And third, through local conservation is important so that we choose where development should and should not happen, ensuring that our animals, water, land, and our communities are still supported. For this initiative, we are committed to move ahead with land use planning. We are committed to successor minerals and lands legislation and developing that legislation in collaboration with First Nation governments. It also includes other key legislations like Wildlife Act and Waters Act. It's also worth noting that the Yukon has the most protected area of any jurisdiction in Canada, and we just added McIntyre Creek Park, Chasson Shua, and we are now working with the Ross River Dana Council towards an IPCA, Indigenous Protected and Conservation Area. Ultimately, our goal is to listen, collaborate, and stop right there.
Thank you for your response. I'll now move to Kate White, Yukon NDP party leader.
So I'll never forget the first time I heard young people chant, "You will die of old age and we'll die of climate change," at a climate rally, and how it made me feel. But I also remember the first time I listened to the youth fellows who developed the reconnection vision. And it was in a town outside the Kwanlin Cultural Center, and I remember the goosebumps I had as they spoke, and I could feel their hope that we need so badly when facing the climate crisis. One of those fellows was Dustin Mackenzie Hubbard, who is now our candidate for Whistle Bend South and does incredible work as a family support worker with CHON, providing land-based healing programs that reconnect people with culture, community, and most importantly, the land. And I feel like the Reconnection Vision's work really provides the direction to reframe the conversation and how we can have these conversations. Working together to frame the conversation on climate change through the lens of disconnection is how we'll be able to work with communities on how to solve this problem together. This means tackling everything from how we respond to forest fires, to the protection of Anwar, or to bringing back the salmon. Asking First Nations to sit at a very colonial table to participate in these conversations on the government's terms, from their perspectives, just hasn't worked. We've seen past governments try to tackle problems in bits and pieces instead of seeing the whole picture or looking at this holistically. We have a responsibility not only to our territory, but to the rest of the planet to act on climate change. It's real, and it's impacting everyone today, whether we like it or not. When they were last in government, the Yukon Party Conservatives pretended it didn't exist, and the Liberals have only thrown Band-Aids on the gaping wound. Our commitment is to tackle this differently by working together with communities, experts, and others, and not shying away from the enormity or the reality of the problem. My team and I understand that reconciliation with First Nation governments and communities is core to fighting climate change, managing resources, and being stewards of the environment. Together, I truly believe that we can build renewable energy. Together, we can protect our land, air, and water, and all those who depend on it. Thank you.
Thank you for your responses to question number 4. We're now going to move on to the last round of questions before our break. Big question. It's health. It's on the theme of health. And the order is Kate White will start, followed by Premier Mike Pemberton, and third by Currie Dixon, Yukon Party leader. So the question is, what is your vision for health and wellness in the Yukon? It's a big question. And how will your party support the CHON Health Authority and Board?
Thank you. So the Yukon NDP supported the creation of the CHON Health Authority and Board because we've seen the need for culturally safe healthcare time and time again. Through the stories shared with me, I see the ongoing impacts of systemic racism within our healthcare system. And I've heard from so many Yukoners about how our current healthcare system has let them down. Fixing this is a priority for our team, and we support the implementation of CHON as a way to address it. In order for its success, we also need to approach its implementation in a way that includes and supports the people providing the care. The focus of our campaign is healthcare and access to healthcare, because at the root of it, our wellness as a community is essential to everything else. If our people are not well, then we cannot have a good economy or a healthy environment, because these are intrinsically linked. Right now, we see how that is not working and how Yukoners are stuck on surgery wait lists or waiting hours at the emergency room or going without the care they need because their health centers are closed. Relationships are the key to making healthcare work. We need to treat those who care for us with the respect they deserve. And we know that the Yukon Party and the Liberals have both degraded those relationships with years of picking fights with nurses and doctors rather than working with them. Both failed to listen when Yukoners told them that the system is not working. And the Liberals have shown that they don't listen to healthcare workers, whether it's nurses or doctors or social workers. And we know the Conservative Yukon Party will undo so much of the work that has been done, including their public discussion about getting rid of the health authority altogether. We've seen the fights that they've picked with healthcare workers that drove them away. And the Yukon NDP track record speaks for itself, whether that's forcing the Liberals to take a harm reduction approach by opening the first supervised consumption site north of 60, opening the walk-in clinic, and bringing wellness specialists into schools. We listen to what communities need, and we work together to make it happen. We know that there is so much more that needs to be done, and we're ready to act. We will fund harm reduction and prevention education throughout the Yukon. We'll train Yukon nurses here at home, and we'll ensure that every Yukoner has access to primary care. I'm proud to have people on our team who have deep understanding of our healthcare system and their challenges and how to solve them. People like Annie Blake, a social worker and former health director for Kwäch'än First Nation, running for re-election in Kwäch'än. Hillary Smith, a registered nurse who works for Kwanlin First Nation and our candidate in Porter Creek Centre. And Tierra Tops, a licensed practical nurse running in Whistle Bend North. We'll work with First Nation leaders, healthcare workers, and community members to move forward in a way that works best for everyone. We need to work together, listen to each other, and hear from people with lived experience and people on the front lines. Thank you.
Thank you for your response. I'll now move to Premier Mike Pemberton from the Liberal Party for your response.
Thank you. Our vision for health and wellness in the Yukon starts with the new health authority, CHON. which became law in April of 2024. This health authority will help create a system that serves patients better and ensures communities have a stronger, more coordinated voice in healthcare decisions. The Yukon Liberals have worked to expand access and care across the territory. We've created a midwifery program and increased the scope of practice for nurse practitioners and pharmacists. We built a new walk-in and bilingual clinics in Whitehorse, and the new mental health unit at Whitehorse General Hospital. Nurse vacancy rates have come down, and I've worked hard to make healthcare careers more sustainable. Since 2017, we provided historic levels of investment in the Yukon Hospital Corporation, increasing core operations spend by 107%. We also recently signed a new collective agreement with Yukon's doctors, raising compensation to help recruit and retain physicians. We purchased a multi-unit property on 408 Wood Street in Whitehorse, which will provide temporary housing for doctors relocating to the Yukon, visiting specialists, and short-term locums in critical service areas. Looking ahead, our priorities are clear. Expand primary care clinics, including full-scope nurse practitioners. Increase the medical travel subsidy by 15% so rural communities have better access to care. Expand Whitehorse General Hospital with a focus on operating rooms and other key infrastructure. Continue to provide further education opportunities for Yukon nurses with a focus on supporting homegrown talent, especially Yukon First Nation nurses who bring a lot to the table. Invest in a community infrastructure while we're waiting for the completion of community wellness plans. Support First Nations in building and owning the infrastructure that their communities need. Build strong partnerships with First Nations communities so that recruitment, training, and retention strategies reflect local priorities, respect culture, and help every community thrive. We will build healthy communities by investing in sports and recreation. We know firsthand how these programs bring people together, foster wellness, and create opportunities for everyone to be active and engaged. During my travels to communities, I've heard loud and clear about the tragic impacts of the opioid crisis and substance use. Every life lost is one too many. I need to stop. Thank you.
Thank you for your response. We'll now move to Currie Dixon, Yukon Party leader.
Well, thank you. We continue to hear from health professionals that our healthcare system is in a state of crisis. There are thousands of Yukoners without a family doctor or access to primary care. This summer, the Yukon Medical Association indicated that number could be as high as 10,000 Yukoners that don't have access to primary care. Our hospital has been operating well above capacity for years now. There's no way around it. The next government of whatever stripe is going to have to make a massive investment in the hospital and expand access to surgical services. Wait times for surgeries and procedures have been increasing, and the number of people on wait lists has been growing steadily. In rural Yukon, we continue to see rolling service reductions or closures around the territory. It's become commonplace for smaller communities in rural Yukon to be told that they should just get used to not having access to health care for weeks or months on end. And quite frankly, if some of these things were to happen in Whitehorse, there would be outrage. We know that First Nations have often been left to deal with the mental health and opioid crisis that is hurting so many communities. So the next government will have some significant challenges in addressing the crisis in our healthcare system. Over the course of this election campaign, we'll be rolling out our plan to recruit and retain more doctors, nurses, and health professionals, to get more nurses and health practitioners into the communities so that Yukoners living in rural Yukon don't need to face constant reductions and closures of health centers. We'll outline our plans for a generational investment in Whitehorse General Hospital. With regard to the Health Authority, we support some aspects of the work that's been done. In particular, we support the efforts to integrate services and we want to see the creation of a stronger voice for Yukon First Nations in the healthcare system, as well as creating a culturally safe delivery of healthcare. But there are some aspects of the Health Authority that we have concerns with. In particular, ensuring our health professionals that work in the Yukon government today have certainty around what this means for their pensions, benefits, and employment going forward as they no longer become public servants. We want to prioritize investments being made directly into the front lines of our healthcare system rather than into administrative positions and bureaucracy. We know that we need to focus on working closely with First Nations governments around the territory to ensure that healthcare services are available in their communities and with the frontline support that they need so that they don't have to keep experiencing prolonged health center closures and service reductions as we've seen become commonplace in so many Yukon communities. Thank you.
Thank you for your remarks, Currie. We'll now get ready to go into a break, but before I do that, I want to thank you for answering your first round of questions. We are now's an opportunity, if you haven't already, to submit some questions to the back table here. We're going to be amalgamating the questions during the break. And then after the break, when we come back, we'll be trying to ask as many questions as we can till just before 9 o'clock, before we go into closing remarks from the candidates about 8:45, 8:50. So with that, we'll take a break until about 10 minutes, 11 minutes after 8. So thank you. Back to our seats. We will begin some of the questioning. At this time again, while everybody's making their way back, I just want to say that for those people out in virtual land and listening live on CHON FM, we have about 130, I think, people online. 130 people online, so that's a really good turnout. And the room here is pretty well packed, so we got a lot of people listening in tonight's forum. I also want to thank again Gúnta Business for sponsoring tonight, and a thank you to CHON FM for going live tonight. Okay, where's your order here? Okay. Okay, so I'm going to begin. So you have 2 minutes this time to respond to the question, up to 2 minutes. You don't have to take all 2 minutes, because we do have a lot more. They are compiling some more back at the table there, but I have 2 to start with. And the order is, first is going to be Premier Mike Pemberton from the Liberal Party, followed by Kate White from the Yukon Democratic Party, and then Currie Dixon from the Yukon Party. So the question is, how will your government address the substance use crisis if elected? And this question is being asked all over in virtual land, everywhere. So if you can go into detail as to how will your government address the substance use crisis if elected. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you for that very important question. We need to take a hard look at the role of organized crime and exploitation, while also making sure communities have the supports and the resources they need. Treatment, prevention, and harm reduction, right where the people live. This is about protecting lives, supporting families, and giving people a real chance to get the help they need. I also think that we do not have enough policing in the Yukon. And we don't have enough policing definitely in our communities when 3 members are allocated or into that community, and then 1 member has some time off, and another member gets sick, and then we overwork the 1 member that's left servicing the community. We can't do this any further. We also need to work with the RCMP and put together a task force that actually deals with the drug crisis that is living here in Whitehorse and in every community in this territory. And this has to stop. We can do better with this than what we're doing. We can work with people, but the communities need to work with us on this. We need to hear from you. We need to hear who's in your community and who's doing this harm to your citizens. I want to fix this problem. I want to work hard on this problem. And if I save one life, that's meaningful to me and meaningful to everyone in this room. Let's work together on this and we can solve this issue.
Thank you for your response. I'll now move to Kate White.
I've yet to talk to a Yukoner that has not been in some way impacted by the substance youth health emergency, whether they've lost a family member, a friend, a coworker, or they are someone who themselves are struggling with substance use. I have sat with so many families as they struggle to support a loved one, and I have seen the barriers to getting support firsthand. What I know is we cannot continue on the path we are on, and we must do better. The Liberals have failed to act. While they may have declared a health emergency, they certainly have not treated it as one. Most recently, they chose to not fund the supervised consumption site on weekends. And that's heartbreaking, and it's devastating, and it could cost Yukoners lives. We will provide support to Yukoners across the continuum of care, from harm reduction to treatment to aftercare. And we have to truly meet people where they are at when they need support and ensure that care is available with dignity and compassion, no matter where in the Yukon they live. And to be clear, they have been asking for help, and they have said what they need, but they haven't had a government who listened. So this means working with First Nation governments to build culturally safe treatment programs. It means working with Blood Ties to ensure the supervised consumption site is open 7 days a week, and education and prevention programming across the territory is fully funded. And this means ensuring when people come home from treatment, they have a safe place to land, supportive housing. I truly believe we can end this crisis, and we can do that by doing what Yukoners do best, and that's taking care of each other.
Thank you for your response. Currie Dixon, Yukon Party.
Well, thank you very much. I have to say, I generally agree with a lot of what my colleagues have said, but I think that one of the missing pieces that I have seen is that while there's been an incredible focus on harm reduction over the last number of years, we haven't seen a commensurate investment in treatment. We haven't seen the increase in treatment options that have been made available, and that means that that inability to access treatment is preventing so many folks from getting the help that they need. So we need to see more treatment, we need to see more prevention, and we need to see more enforcement. Those three aspects, I think, need to complement the work that has been done around harm reduction, and we need to see that sort of investment. Now, one thing Kate mentioned that I totally agree with is the second stage or the following treatment, ensuring that we have sober housing that's available to Yukoners. So many folks we hear from that when they come back from treatment, they find themselves back in the same cycle of addiction and end up getting back into that lifestyle. We need to have options for them that allow them to come back and live a cleaner, healthier lifestyle and break the cycle of addiction. So that's my take.
Thank you for your responses to question number 1. We'll now move on to question number 2, which we'll start with Currie Dixon, followed by Kate White, followed by Mike Pemberton. Okay, so another big question. In detail, explaining what you'll do, how will you address affordability? We've heard some comments about that in everybody's openings and responses to other questions, but what will you do? How will you address affordability in the Yukon, such as housing, food, and the high cost of living that all of us are facing in the Yukon? So we'll start with Currie Dixon, Yukon Party.
Well, over the course of the last several weeks and months, I've been going around the Yukon and talking to a lot of Yukoners, and this is something that comes up at just about Every street and every door, folks are concerned about the cost of living in the Yukon. One of the things that is probably the biggest driver of that for so many Yukoners is the cost of electricity. They continue to point out that the rates are increasing and making life so much harder. And when it comes to electricity, that's something that affects every single Yukoner. Every single Yukoner benefits from and uses electricity. Currently, Yukon Energy has a proposal before the Yukon Utilities Board to increase rates by 34% over the next 18 months. We think that that's not sustainable. We know that Yukoners cannot afford a 34% increase in their power rates. That's why we've committed to working with the Yukon Energy Corporation to cut that submission down. That's going to require the Yukon government to provide funding directly to Yukon Energy to offset the costs that they have to invest in the grid right now. The investment that they're making right now in the grid is necessary. Our grid has been neglected for too long, but those costs can't be borne strictly by ratepayers. It cannot be borne strictly by people who pay higher power bills. We need to use the fiscal muscles of the Yukon government to lighten that load for Yukoners, and that's one way that we can concretely reduce the cost of living for Yukoners by cutting back that dramatic increase in our power bills that's coming over the next few months. Thank you.
Thank you for that response. I'll now move to Kate White from the NDP.
Thank you very much. So I've been hearing for months, for years even, that things are too expensive. Our campaign slogan is better healthcare, lower costs, and there's a reason for that. I've seen the track record. I appreciate that now the Yukon Party is talking about investing in energy infrastructure, but they were in government. And I will point out that there's a lack of investments to my right as well. I want you to look at our record. I'd like you to look at what we've done, what we did with 3 MLAs in the last 4 years. We raised minimum wage. It was $13 in 2021, and it's $17.65, I think, now. We brought in a dental plan that is changing the lives of Yukoners. It's changing the lives of Canadians, because for the first time from coast to coast to coast, Canadians have access to that health care. We put a cap on rent increases. Not a popular one with my friends from the Yukon Party, but under their tenure, rents went up by 20, 30, 50. One time I heard about it going up 100%. And so I will tell you that when we talk about affordability, it is about supporting people. It is about putting a cap on the energy rate increase, but there's a whole plan behind that for us. And so I've seen the track record from both of my colleagues, and I will tell you that we will take different actions. We will make different decisions.
Thank you for your response. I'll now move to Premier Mike Pemberton from the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Rose. Let's talk YEC first. Just so you know, I sat with the board of YEC for about 7 years, and as chair of the Yukon Development Corporation. The one thing we can't do is mingle into Yukon Energy and allow them not to go to rate. But what we need them to do is to go to rate more consistently, and for politicals to stay out of the, out of it, right? To start, don't direct them not to go to rate, because through the previous government, the Yukon Party, they were held from going to rate for a long period of time. And that's where you see your major increases. Yes, the rate that's taking place right now is under the Liberal government, but it's because of the infrastructure that was left in disarray from the 14 years of the previous government. I also have been advocating, even before I went into this role, I've been advocating with the federal government through a pan-northern approach on an increase in Northern Living Allowance. And I continue to do that with our Prime Minister today. We need to see Northern Living Allowance increased and tied to CPI, and that will help our cost. It's not everything we need, but it's a piece of what we need. When it comes, I'll go back to energy for a second. We as a government are responsible to make sure that we have the funding to put into that energy corp so we can write down the rate, that we can provide them the funding they need to fix the infrastructure that's in total disarray. Thank you.
Thank you for your responses to question number 2. I'll now move to question number 3. We'll start with Kate White, followed by Premier Mike Pemberton, then followed by Currie Dixon. So your third question is in regards to the First Nations School Board. So again, how exactly will your government work with the First Nations school boards and other schools to address staffing and infrastructure challenges? Go ahead, Kate White, NDP.
Thank you very much. Education is one of my favorite things in the world. Education affects everything. When we talk about investing in education, we talk about upstream investments, and that really helps us in the long run. Schools are in disarray. I had a meeting with the First Nations school board recently, and they said they need additional support. That the Liberal government did a calculation, and the funding transfer for them only includes First Nations students and not the non-Indigenous students who attend their schools. So they had a cut by $3.5 million. If we want to talk about fairness, we want to talk about support. Through the confidence and supply agreement, we put 60 extra educational assistants into schools, and I will tell you that's not enough. I will tell you when we look at education, we need to look at the whole child. When we have children with complex needs, they need to be looked at as an individual. Families need support, students need support, schools need support. Teachers right now fill out report cards, everything's online, everything's digital. And they, at FH Collins, they have 2 teacher computers in the staff room. And that's just one school. And when we talk about school infrastructure, we can recognize it's crumbling. The roof in Teslin is leaking. The roof in Haines Junction is leaking. Tequila Elementary needs to be replaced. Grey Mountain was a temporary school 50 years ago. And so what it is, it's about investments. If we believe in the future, which is children, then we need to invest so they can be successful. I've worked very hard with the teachers, the Yukon Association of Education Professionals. I've worked hard with the First Nation School Board, the First Nation Education Directorate, and there are lots of lessons and solutions there, and I will continue to act on them.
Thank you for your response. I'll now move to Premier Mike Pemberton, Yukon Liberal Party.
Thank you, Rose. There's a lot of what Ms. White said there that I certainly agree with. We need to attract and retain educators. We need to do a better job of that. But in order to do that, we must provide housing. We need to build housing, not only here in this community, but throughout all the communities in the Yukon. Because it's hard to attract somebody to come here and teach our youth and the students if we don't have a place for them to live. They need places to live. And this is a struggle throughout the territory. We have provided housing in some cases, teacher housing in some communities. Kate is right. We need to put the funding in place. This is critical. This is our youth we're talking about. We need to work with our youth and make their lives better. That's what we live for, making our children better than our life. And we need to do this. It's important that we provide through sports, recreation, and art an opportunity for our youth to get involved with a program. So we can do some mentoring through those programs for those students. Find a different path for them. We need to look at some trades as well. We've lost track of what we need in the territory. It's not academia we need. We need people that want to go into trades, that can work for this gentleman, and pound nails or pull wires. And we've lost track of that.
Thank you for your response. Currie Dixon, Yukon Party.
Thank you. Excellent question, and I'm happy to address it. I want to begin by commending the First Nations School Board for the excellent work that they've done since they came into creation a few years ago. They took over 11 schools from the Department of Education, And they've made some considerable changes already in just the few years they've been in operation that have resulted in actual tangible educational outcomes for Yukon children. We've seen literacy scores improve. We've seen a number of other academic metrics that have improved as a result of the program changes that they've made in their schools. During that same time that the First Nations School Board took over 11 schools from the Department of Education, the Department of Education hasn't made a single change in its size or composition. It's operating the exact same as it was when it operated those 11 schools that it gave up to the First Nations School Board. And we think that needs to change. There needs to be a change in focus at the department to better address that. Now, when I met with the First Nations School Board, the point that they made to me that was absolutely clear was the biggest issue that they had was the lack of funding support from the Yukon government. It's not just about the amount of money, it's about the consistency and clarity of that funding over multiple years. They often find themselves facing a situation where their transfer payments come in midway through the school year, which doesn't allow them to plan for the school year in the way that they should. So what they need, and what I'd like to deliver for them, is multi-year, consistent funding for the First Nations School Board. It gives them the clarity to plan, it gives them the ability to implement the changes that they need to make to build on the success that they've had so far. Thank you.
Thank you for your responses to question number 3. We're moving right along. Got on to question 4. I'm going to talk faster now so we can get more in. There's a big pile back there. So, okay, question number 4. We're going to start off with Currie Dixon, followed by Kate White, then Mike Pemberton. Your question is, how will your government uphold the calls to justice under the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Two-Spirit? Currie Dixon, Yukon Party.
Okay, again, an excellent question. I want to actually take a moment to commend the work of the current minister, Jeannie McLean, who's led tremendous work on behalf of Yukon on that front. I think that the Yukon has been a leader when it comes to the response to missing and murdered Indigenous women across the country. And the work that we've done here that has been led by the government, I think is something that we need to build on. So from my perspective, I want to give kudos where they're due and simply indicate that we need to continue on the path that we're on. The government has built a strong relationships with Indigenous groups as well as First Nation governments in charting that path forward, creating the plan that we've all agreed to, and carrying on with that work in partnership with First Nations governments and organizations. So on that front, I think we need to do more, but we need to carry on with the path that we're on and accept the fact that there's been real success and that Yukon should be proud about some of the work that we've done on that front. There's a lot more work to do, though, and I'm keen to see that work fulfilled.
Thank you for your response. I'll now move to Kate White, Yukon New Democratic Party.
Thank you very much. We don't always disagree. I echo Currie's praise of the work that has been done for the missing, murdered Indigenous women, girls, and 2S plus folk. The work to get to the point where we are right now has been long and it's been hard, and it's been really important. So it's making sure that we continue on in the right way and you know, sitting at the tables and going for the updates. It's clear that it's important and it needs to continue. And so I look forward to supporting the work going forward.
Thank you for your response. I'll now move to Premier Mike Pemberton, Liberal Party.
Thank you. Thank you both for recognizing the work that Minister McLean has done on this file. An incredible job. You know, and I agree with everything you're both saying. And I'm just going to leave it at this. Let's work together to bring them home. Let's bring them home.
Thank you for your responses to question number 4. Now I'm going to move to question number 5. We're going to start with you, Mike, and then we're going to go to Kate White and Currie Dixon. So the question is, Indigenous land guardians programs are growing across Canada and growing in the Yukon. How will your government support and help increase this very important initiative in the Yukon that still needs support? So we'll start with Premier Mike Pemberton from Liberal Party.
Rose, could you read it one
Yep. Indigenous land guardians programs are growing across Canada. How will your government support and help increase this very important initiative in the Yukon? How will you support this guardian program?
Thank you. First Nations in Yukon have been guardians of this land for millennia. We need to recognize that. Nobody cultural knowledge of our land and our waters and our animals lives with our First Nations peoples. Not our First Nation peoples, but the First Nation peoples. It's important that we make sure as a government that First Nations have the capacity and our support as a government to continue on in this very, very important work as it relates to everything we're talking about, whether we're talking about mining, whether we're talking about other economic development. It's important that we continue to accept and work with the First Nation, our First Nation partners to achieve results that we're looking for, but also or make it that we're protecting at all times our land, our water, and all people of the Yukon.
Thank you for that response. I'll now move to Kate White, Yukon NDP.
Thank you so much. This also fires me up. I remember the first conversation I had with Dave Porter about it, and then when I got to meet Tanya Ball, and she told me what they were doing in northern British Columbia, and my mind was blown. So Indigenous land guardian programs, although they may be sort of new here, they aren't new for sort of Western Canada. And this is a real opportunity about reconnection to land, about economic opportunity in rural Yukon. And this is also about decentralizing Yukon government jobs. There's an opportunity for land guardians to help with monitoring of water on mine sites and doing wildlife like counts and doing all these things right now where people fly in from helicopters from outside. The real opportunity with land guardians is based on hundreds of years of knowledge and that shared opportunity. And so this is something that I talked about in 2021. And so I'm excited that it's a question now. There's only one way that this can go, and it's up, but that requires financial support, and that requires, the desire to make it happen. And so thank you for the question, and the future is very, very fun for those folks.
Thank you for your response. I'll now move to Currie Dixon, Yukon Party.
Thank you, and I appreciate the question as well. I know that I've met with land guardians from other First Nations outside of the Yukon, including in the Tahltan traditional territory, and I know that it's been successful in other areas and that there's interest here in the Yukon as well. But I know that interest isn't shared completely with every First Nation in the Yukon, and for some First Nations, they're eager to pursue it. Others don't have the development of a land guardian program as a priority, and so that's the kind of it's the kind of initiative we would need to work with individual First Nations on to determine whether there's interest in such a program in a particular First Nation community. If there is, of course, we're willing to work together to pursue it, but you need to have the First Nation government on board as well, and in instances where First Nation governments are on board, that's certainly something we'd be willing to work with them on.
Thank you for your responses to question number 5. We're going to go to one more question before we lead up to our closing remarks. So we might be able to fit it in. You have 30 seconds now. I'm just kidding. Okay, so question number 6. Yukon River salmon have been continuously declining year after year. What steps will you commit to bring salmon back and ensure our treaties are upheld? We'll start with Premier Mike Pemberton from the Yukon Liberal Party, followed by Kate Currie.
Salmon, the life food. I think the work or the agreement that was worked out with the state of Alaska and on the moratorium on salmon has helped. We saw some Chinook coming back into our river system this year. That was great to see, and even to a point, I think, where the season was actually open for a little bit for the Chinook species. It's important that we continue to listen with First Nations, listen to First Nations about this valuable resource. I've heard lately, I've heard some stuff about the salmon letter here in Whitehorse, and that we need to make sure that we have the infrastructure in place that support the everlasting life of the species. And so that is going to be challenging and expensive, but that's work that needs to be done. And I don't want to mention money when we're talking about salmon, but I already did, and I think it's important that we invest into the species and make sure it's here for generations to come.
Thank you for that response. I'll now move to Kate White, Yukon NDP.
Thank you. So I'm 48 years old, and the reason I highlight that is there are friends of my age who were able to go to like fish camp, legitimately fish camp in their living territories on the rivers of their ancestors, and they were able to fish. And those friends can no longer do that, and their children can't do that, and fish is flown in from the Taku River, and that is hard. I remember watching the movie Salmon Confidential years ago that featured Dr. Alexander Morton, and she is a salmon biologist. And I remember having a debate in the Legislative Assembly and asking the Yukon Party Minister of the Environment at the time about what they were doing for salmon. Were they talking to the Department of Fisheries and Oceans? Were they talking about fish farming in BC, and was that affecting us? And what were they going to do? And so it's hard to know that children right now, your children, other children, are not able to go to fish camp in that same way. That the fish wheels I remember from the Klondike, they don't exist anymore. And so we can see the actions being taken by First Nation leadership. There's an entire group focused around salmon and how important that is. And I think it's about reprioritizing. So I look towards the leadership of the Klondike and First Nations down along the Yukon River who are calling for personhood to the Yukon River to protect the corridor, and about what that would mean for salmon habitat and what that would mean for the opportunity for the salmon to come back. And so unfortunately, this is challenging, and it's going to be multi-generational, but if we don't act now, then there isn't hope for the future.
Thank you. I'll now move to Currie Dixon, Yukon Party.
Well, thank you very much. So when we're talking about salmon, I think for the government's response here in the Yukon, the starting point needs to be under the co-management bodies that are established under the Umbrella Final Agreement. The Yukon Fish and Wildlife Management Board and the Salmon Subcommittee are meant to be the primary instruments through which we deal with these issues and discuss these issues in the Yukon, and we need to continue to support that work. There has been work that's been done bilaterally with Alaska, and that is good and needs to be supported. But there's more that we can be doing on this side of the border that I think would help, and there needs to be some difficult discussions here in the Yukon about some of that work. There's groups like the Salmon Stewardship Committee that's begun that conversation. They're talking about things like habitat restoration. They're talking about measures that can be taken on this side of the border and in the Yukon that can help address salmon populations, including the difficult discussion around the notion of a hatchery. And I know that's something that has a lot of controversy attached to it. There's some First Nations that feel strongly that's not the right way to go. Some First Nations do feel that that's something we need to begin talking about to enhance the population that are starting here in the Yukon. And those are difficult discussions that need to be had in partnership between governments, and I'm prepared to have those discussions for sure. But the only way we're going to move forward on that those kind of developments is by doing it in partnership. So thank you.
Okay, thank you for your responses to all the questions. We got through 6 questions. So with that, I'm going to be moving to our closing remarks. And closing remarks, So I close my eyes and pick a name. We're going to start with Premier Mike Pemberton from the Yukon Liberal Party.
You looked, Rose.
Or from the Yukon. No, I didn't. Yeah.
I know where. Thank you, and thank you to my counterparts, Kate White, Currie Dixon. And I want to thank everyone in the room tonight and CYFN for the questions, the important questions. Hard conversations move us forward. They challenge us, they push us, and they remind us what leadership requires. I'm grateful to be part of these conversations. I've said it before, I don't always get it right, and I own that. But I believe in showing up, in listening, and in staying in the room, especially when it's hard. I believe in the team the Yukon Liberals are building, a team that reflects diversity, the strength, and the heart of this territory. People who come from different places with different stories, but all share a deep commitment to public service and to this land, its animals, its waters, and its people. I've heard loud and clear from every single one of our candidates that recognition that government-to-government relationships are what will move us forward together. I know that we have strong partners in the federal Liberal government as well. Just last week, I reached out both formally and personally to the Prime Minister's office, as well as to the Minister of Indigenous Services Canada, to elevate concerns we've heard around cuts to Jordan's principal funding for the Rural Nutrition Program. We'll continue to use these relationships to get real, urgent action on concerns like these. Our team is running a campaign rooted in respect, a campaign that refuses to divide people, a campaign that says thank you to everyone who puts their name forward, no matter which party they represent. The Yukon Liberals have always been a home for people who may not agree on everything, who believe in inclusion, partnership, and progress. I know some of my words in the past haven't lived up to that ideal. I'll keep doing the work to be a better ally, a better listener, and a better leader. I believe in the future of this territory because Yukon's strength is its people, and central to that is the leadership, governance, and knowledge of Yukon First Nations. Reconciliation Group.
Thank you for your closing remarks. I'll now move to Kate White, Yukon New Democratic Party.
Thank you. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be here with all of you tonight, both in person and across the territory. Thank you to CYFN for organizing this debate and for all the people who worked so hard to pull this together. And I thank my colleagues for the discussion today. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss issues like governance, climate change and adaptation, issues like economic development and its relationship to our land and water, healthcare in our communities, and how to get better access. Because these are the issues that we're hearing about every single day. I'm hearing about them, and so is our incredible team of candidates. When we talk about our plan to make life better for Yukoners, we're talking about building on the work that our team is already doing. We'll build on John Vandermeer's experience spearheading renewable energy projects that reduced his community's dependence on diesel. We'll build on Josie O'Brien and Justin Mackenzie Hubbard's experience working with young families and children to help people reconnect with culture, community, and the land. We'll build on Linda Moen's work as an advocate for her community and leading groundbreaking projects like the Kwanlin Cultural Center. And we'll build on my friend and colleague Annie Blake's work, standing up for real Yukon, for Gunta, Kwäch'än, and for championing better healthcare for all Yukoners. We don't need to repeat past government's mistakes. There is a better way forward, and we are a team you can count on. The Yukon NDP have the tools to make healthcare better for Yukoners. We can lower the cost of housing and electricity bills, and we can make sure that with the right training and good paying jobs, youth find opportunity in all of our communities. We can work in respectful and meaningful partnership in support of people and communities during tough times and build a better path forward together. That's what this election is about, leadership you can count on. At the start of the evening, I pledged to you to be different from what's come before me, to be an honest partner. We don't have to go back to disrespect and shameful court fights. You can count on me, you can count on our team to listen, to actually listen to your concerns and your ideas. We're ready to get to work, and we understand that meaningful partnership is the only way forward. Thank you again for your time, and I hope to see many of you again tomorrow night for the next debate. Thank you.
Thank you for your closing remarks. I'd now move to Currie Dixon from the Yukon Party.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I do want to close with a note of thanks as well. And thank you so much to Rose for moderating. You've done a wonderful job tonight, Rose. Thank you. Thank you to CYFN for putting this discussion on tonight. I think it's an important forum for us to come together as leaders and express to you our differing views, and in some cases, some of the similarities we have around certain issues as we chart a path forward for the territory. I'm very proud of the team that the Yukon Party has put together over the last number of weeks, and the candidates that we have put forward, in particular some of our excellent First Nations candidates from around the territory. As I said, we have 6 different First Nations represented in our slate of candidates, which I think is a profound statement on the direction we want to carry this team forward with. We're looking forward to offering change to Yukoners in the next election, and we know that means that we need to ensure that we continue to partner with Yukon First Nations, partner with First Nations governments, and find a path forward for all of us that improves the lives of all Yukoners. So thank you again to the CYFN for hosting tonight. Thank you very much to my colleagues, to Mike and Kate, for the respectful dialogue that we've had tonight. And thank you all for coming tonight, and those of you online for listening to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you to all the candidates, and thank you to our engaged audience on your participation. 130 people out there, just on Zoom, have heard your pledges and what your plan is to do. And thanks to CHON FM, many people across the Yukon have heard you in our communities. I want to say in my quick closing, before I call up the Grand Chief for the final closings for this evening, is that some time ago, I remember, when I was young, many Yukon First Nations people didn't see the importance of voting in other elections outside of our First Nation elections. At the time, band council elections. But that has changed, and more Indigenous people are showing up at the polls. It does matter. Yukon First Nations play a vital role in shaping our Yukon's future with other governments. On election day, you can vote at your district returning office or at the Elks Hall in Whitehorse for any district. Just bring ID to prove who you are and where you live. Check electionsyukon.ca to confirm your registration and find your advanced polling place. Again, I'd like to thank Gúnta Business Consulting for their work tonight and sponsorship of this All Candidates Forum, and for CHON FM for broadcasting live so that many people in our Yukon communities can hear tonight's important forum. Thank you for having me as your moderator, and thank you to the awesome, very efficient team at CYFN and Gúnta Business for working with me tonight. So I'd now like to call upon Grand Chief Mathieya Alatini for your closing remarks.
Thank you guys for sticking it out. It is late evening. Really enjoyed hearing your thoughts, your ideas for the future of our communities, of our territory. It takes a lot to stand up and put your name forward for politics. So really commend you and your teams for getting a great slate of candidates to step up and want to represent our territory. I think that's extremely important. It's part of our democratic process. And as Rose had mentioned, we are seeing an increased activity in First Nation participation in electoral process in the Territory. I do want to note that it's not just the candidates that we're voting for at this election. We're also voting regarding a plebiscite, and it's on electoral reform. So when you go to vote, you'll be able to cast a ballot about electoral reform. We're voting on whether it is first past the post, which is our existing system, or going to a ranked voting system where you'll be able to choose 1, 2, or 3 candidates. And we know in the Territory, we all like choice. I want to encourage people to take the time, not just vote for party. I think these guys have put together, their teams have put together great slate of candidates throughout the Territory. Look at those candidates, look at their history, and really think about who do you want to represent your riding, your voice in the Territory, because we've seen that coalition governments work. We get a lot done for our Territory when we look outside of what we're used to hearing from the US. We are good at working together in the Territory, and collaboration is at the core of what we do. It's how we got these agreements. It's how we've gotten to land management and the work that we continue to, that were issues that you guys spoke about. So please take a look at the candidates that are there and give good consideration to the people who are putting their names forward. Thank you guys for tonight, and thank you to everyone online. Gunta and everyone here.
I'll close with a closing prayer. Kwäch'än data yata ninje, aganza nu sothan dakanata je, sothan datanata nanje, dadu dakunata je, klahu je, Kwäch'än. May you travel home safe, and may your families be safe, and have a good evening.